From Hollywood to Westminster, in the office, on the street. Never before have we been made so aware of sexual harassment. And it's everywhere, from Australia to Zimbabwe. So how does it differ around the world? And can we do anything to stop it? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. Now, for the last month or so, we've been bombarded with revelations of how powerful men have misused their positions. Story after story has appeared accusing the Hollywood mogul, the box office star or the senior politician of sexual harassment. And this week, a British government minister was forced to resign. What's particularly telling is that very few of us are really surprised and that almost every woman has her own story to tell, and it's global. Laura Burden-Manley reports now on the wave of allegations of sexual harassment and a growing public reluctance to accept it.
It began with Hollywood producer and filmmaker Harvey Weinstein, when reports of sexual harassment spanning 3 decades first surfaced in October. An avalanche of similar allegations followed, including revelations he paid millions of dollars to silence his victims. Accusations of sexual misconduct and abuse were then levelled at some of Hollywood's other big names. Women and some men flooded social media with the hashtag #MeToo, at times to recount instances in which they were abused. Then similar accusations struck the corridors of power at Westminster in London. This man, until Wednesday, was British Defence Secretary. Michael Fallon was forced to resign after what's been described as inappropriate behaviour towards his cabinet colleagues and a female journalist.
In the past, I may have fallen below the high standards that we require of the armed forces that I have the honour to represent.
And it's not just in the West. Women in Peru vying to represent their country at the Miss Universe competition surprised the audience when, instead of revealing their body measurements, they revealed these strong messages.
My name is Camila Canikoba and I represent the Department of Lima. My figures are 2,202 cases of reported femicide in the past 9 years in my country.
A poll of international experts found Peru had one of the highest number of cases of abuse against women. But the survey places Cairo as the most dangerous city for women to live in. Delhi and Sao Paulo emerge as the worst cities in terms of risk of sexual violence. The fatal gang rape of a woman on a Delhi bus in 2012 led to a wave of protests and jolted many in India out of apathy over the treatment of women. It forced the government to toughen penalties for sex crimes. And it's everywhere. But will this growing resistance make a difference? Laura Burden-Manley, Al Jazeera.
All right, let's introduce our guests now. In New York, we have Caroline de Haas, a French women's rights activist. From Providence in the US state of Rhode Island, Matthew Gutmann, a professor of anthropology at Brown University and the author of several books on Latin American masculinity. And from Montreal in Canada, we have Mona Eltahawy, a columnist and commentator on Arab, Muslim and global feminism issues. Caroline, can I start with you in New York? How would you characterise this moment? We have seen a month of these accusations, many of them quite lurid, quite detailed. We've seen a lot of men in power under pressure. We've seen the first high-profile politician to resign. Is this a watershed moment in the issue of sexual harassment against women?
I think that we live a moment where we break illusion of equality. Illusion of equality, it's that in our country, I think in most country in the world, when you speak about gender equality, people say, okay, it's okay now, you have no problem. We have gender equality. In France, we hear that every day. Okay, Slow, you have no problem, you have all right now. So this moment is very important because we put out this illusion of equality, and we show that in reality, in France, like everywhere in the world, we don't have equality now. So it's the first step. We break this illusion of equality, and now we have to act. We have to make public policy to stop this violence against women.
Because Matthew, we're talking about sexual harassment. That is the language that we're using at the moment. Does sexual harassment inevitably lead to sexual violence?
I don't think it inevitably leads to sexual violence, but I think that they are of a piece. It seems to me that the moment today is one of tremendous argument, debate, and struggle over these issues. Just think of the election and inauguration of one of the most bullying, sexist figures in the history of the United States, Donald Trump, and the response the day later by a massive demonstration of women and men denouncing sexual harassment, sexual violence, and a list of other things, so that you see polar opposite opinions and experiences being brought out, and the clash is really going on. And I think that's what we've been seeing in the last month in every part of the world, that these things are being brought out in public in important new ways.
And Mona, coming to you, a clash, says Matthew, and this being a very important moment in terms of the equality of women. How is this clash being played out, if at all, in the Middle East? I know you're actually from Egypt. You live a lot of the time, part of the year anyway, at least in Cairo.
Yes, I think this is a fantastic moment for global feminism, for the idea that we have to dismantle institutionalized patriarchy across the world, and that patriarchy exists in every country. Now, one of the ways that we began to look at it with more scrutiny in the Middle East and North Africa was after the waves of uprisings that swept across the region, that began in Tunisia in 2010, came to my country, Egypt, in 2011. And those uprisings continue to reverberate. Women are looking around and asking, well, where's our revolution? Are these men that we marched in the streets with our allies, or do we have to overthrow them as well? So the way that I often phrase it is that if we rose up against the dictators in the presidential palaces, our revolution, in order to be complete, must also be a revolution against the dictator on the street corner and the dictator in the bedroom, in the boardroom, everywhere.
Yes, but Mona,
and I think that's what we're realizing now.
Absolutely.
This might have begun in Hollywood, but it's spreading across the world because it exists across the world.
But Mona, just recently, a month or so ago, Cairo was named as the most dangerous city in the world for a woman to live.
Yes, absolutely. There is. See, this is the difference. I'm so glad that your first guest said this is a good time for, for lack of a better term, Western feminism to recognize that equality has not been reached. We are not in a post-feminist society in the so-called West. We definitely recognize this in other parts of the world, whether it's in India or Egypt or Nigeria, where I'm going next month. We have always recognized that it's dangerous on the streets. We have always recognized that we are denied opportunities. And I think what happened when those actresses came out and spoke out against Harvey Weinstein, and now a minister has been forced to resign in the UK, is that the West now is also recognizing we have not overthrown patriarchy. We have not overthrown these dictators. And I think that it's time for West American feminism, where a sexual predator, Donald Trump, was voted president by 53% of white women voters. It's time for American feminism to listen to feminists in India, in Egypt, in Nigeria, and other parts of the world where we have never claimed to be post-feminist, and where we recognize, yes, it's dangerous, and we are fighting every day.
Matthew, so Mona's talking about a revolution of overthrowing the patriarchy. It doesn't sound like a very good time for men. I'm just wondering, from a male perspective, what is sexual harassment about? Is it the way men behave? Is it the way they're wired? Or are these behaviours picked up over time through society, through conditioning?
See, to me, I think you've gotten to one of the biggest problems when you say, is this the way they're wired? I think this really gets to the heart of the debate in many situations. Are men, in fact, will boys be boys? And is that the heart of the problem? And you may not like it. You may not like how Donald Trump behaves or Harvey Weinstein or anybody else, but they are just acting like men. And I would say emphatically that is not the case. What they've been able to do is act with impunity, and we need to stop that. In many cities around the world, including in Mexico City, Sao Paulo, and Rio de Janeiro in Latin America, you have subway cars during rush hour that are for women only. But you also have tremendous debate over whether this is a good thing or a bad thing to happen. In fact, you have feminists opposed to these cars on the basis of thinking that this is capitulating to male bad behavior, and what we need to do is stop those men from doing it.
The emphasis always
You have other men coming along and saying, this is just what men are going to do if they can get away with it.
And
I don't think that's true.
The emphasis, Matthew, always seems to be upon the woman having to ameliorate, change, mitigate, modify her behavior in order to accommodate the bad behavior of a man.
And I think
seems to be always the emphasis.
And if men are not part of the solution here, they are part of the problem. And it's not good enough for men to just say, I don't do these things. I don't sexually assault. I don't sexually harass. The fact is, if they're not doing something to stop it, they are part of the problem as well.
And Catherine, I'm just wondering, there is a balance to be maintained, isn't there? Relations between men and women, particularly in the West, they have to be maintained. We can't have men feeling so intimidated by the prospect of being accused of being a harasser that ordinary relations do not continue. So there is a fine line to be trodden, isn't there?
I think it's very funny because in France, after Me Too, we have a hashtag balance ton porc. It's denounce your pig, name your pig. And hundreds of thousands of women use this hashtag to denounce harassment or rape. And it was very interesting to see the reaction of a lot of powerful men. They say, oh my God, be careful. We are not all people like that, So it was very funny because the hashtag say, denounce your pig, denounce the problem, And some men feel concerned. So I ask immediately, if you feel concerned by this hashtag, perhaps you have a problem. And I think that men as women, everybody in the society, in France, but I think everywhere in the world, have a form of tolerance about violence against women. When you are with your family in a diner and you are eating, and somebody, for example, say, oh my God, somebody steal my bag in the street, everybody will say, oh my God, that's awful. Do you want we go to the police to do something? What could we do to help you? So if somebody in the diner say, oh my God, I'm being raped by somebody, everybody looks like that. Oh my God, shh. Oh, can I have a piece of cake, please? And the subjects go out. So I think that we have to change in our societies the look about the violence against women, and people have to be intolerant about the violence against women in the streets, but in the house too. Because I don't know the number in other countries, but in France, I think it's the same in US or in Egypt or in Latin America. In France, 80% of the people who are raped knew the aggressor, 80%. So a lot of people, for a lot of women, it was in the home, at work. It was not in the street. So we have to act against harassment in the street, but we have to act in the society and in the home too.
Mona, it's quite interesting, isn't it, to consider the cultural differences, the cultural level of tolerances and the different conventions between the sexes, and understanding the social cues. Tell us a bit more then about what happens now in Egypt. As we've already said, it's already been deemed the most dangerous city in the world for women. But tell us how men and women interact.
Well, I think one of the hardest problems for women in more conservative cultures is to speak out about sex in general. And when it comes to sexual violence, as often is the case with women across the world, but especially so in conservative societies, women are held accountable for violence that happens to them. So we're asked, what were you wearing? Why were you there? Why were you alone with him? Why did you get into a car with him? And again, I recognize that these are questions that have plagued women across the world. But in especially conservative societies, these are very problematic because it puts the woman between a rock and a hard place, because then she's unable to speak out because of the shame. She's unable to speak out because she's going to be victimized twice. She's already been victimized by the sexual violence, and she's going to be victimized by her society. But also the laws that we have in place in Egypt, for example, after more and more women, because of the revolution in 2011, after more and more women were willing to speak out about sexual violence, both in the home and outside on the street, we had tougher laws put in place. But it's not about laws, it's about dismantling a systematic and institutionalized patriarchy that allows boys and men to behave in this way. So what's happening in Egypt now is many women have joined the hashtag #MeToo movement. Many women in Lebanon, many women across the region have, because again, this is a global scourge. But what we have to recognize in Egypt is we have to overcome this conservative silencing of women. Just a few days ago on Egyptian satellite television, a lawyer of all people said that women who wear torn jeans deserve to be raped. He actually said it's a national duty
we saw
to rape
that.
these
we
women.
saw that,
now, the
actually.
National Council for Women in Egypt has spoken out.
What I'd like to ask you, I mean, we get an idea of how appalling it is for many women in Cairo, in Egypt. But what I'm wondering from you is, how do you start to dismantle the patriarchy? As you say, the legislative program is in place. How do you legislate for ideas, for customs and habits and traditions?
Well, what you do is you tackle this idea that everyone knows but they fail to act, because that idea existed and enabled men like Harvey Weinstein and a whole bunch of other men who in the US have been either kicked out of their jobs or forced to resign. And that idea exists on multiple levels. Everyone knows these things happen, but they fail to act. And I would like to introduce into the discussion as well the Muslim scholar Tariq Ramadan, who is Egyptian Swiss, and he has been accused by several women of sexual violence. He has denied these claims, but several women have accused him of sexual violence. Now, as a Muslim woman, I understand how difficult it is for these women to speak out, because what you're dealing with here, and now I'm taking the conservative context and putting it globally, as Muslim women, especially in Western societies, we're caught between an Islamophobic right wing that wants to demonize all our men, all Muslim men, and we're caught between the Muslim communities in which we live that insists on defending all our men. So what is a Muslim woman to do, whether she lives in Egypt or Christian women in Egypt also have to wade through conservatism. So when you take that and you put it on a global context, and you're a Muslim woman who lives in Europe or who lives in the US today, where there is growing Islamophobia and racism, it makes it even harder. So what we have to do is, yes, we have to continue with hashtag #MeToo. We have to continue speaking out, but we have to dismantle patriarchy by beginning to dismantle they knew but they failed to act.
All right,
the Muslim communities knew but they failed to act.
Can I jump in there?
The workplaces knew but they failed to act.
Can I jump in there, Mona? Because I'd like to go to Matthew and get an idea of the situation in Latin America, which is a region in which Matthew specialises. Now, it also has a very, very high rate of femicide. It has high rates of sexual harassment against women. And also, this is often linked, this kind of behaviour is linked to this perception of machismo. Explain what machismo is within the Latin American context, and whether that is indeed the fig leaf, if you like, which covers up bad behaviour.
See, I think that blaming machismo and saying there's some kind of peculiar cultural trait about people who speak Spanish is a dead end. Just as it is to say that working class men are the real problem, and they're much less educated, and educated men wouldn't harass women. We've seen so clearly in recent days how false that kind of thinking is. And as your other guests have pointed out repeatedly, these problems are not unique to one region of the world. Nonetheless, you have rampant problems of sexual harassment throughout Latin America as you do elsewhere. I think that the solutions to these things are political, they're social, they're cultural, they're ideological. And so I think that if, in terms of dismantling the patriarchy, we need to look to the fact that men are still the governing body of people in every single state legislature, government around the world, with a few exceptions like Rwanda, which has a majority women in their national parliament. But I just came from China, and men again were put in charge of the government there.
Right.
I come from the United States, where all white men will sit around discussing women's health constantly. In Latin America, actually, you have major problems. So you also have had 10 heads of state who've been women, which you haven't had in the United States. So to say that Latin America has a particular problem, it does. But it shares this with other parts of the world.
Okay, Catherine, we've talked an awful lot about sexual harassment against women, and gender parity is, it seems to be, the fundamental issue here. But what about men? The recent allegations have also included sexual harassment of men. Now, if a man comes to you and your consultancy and complains of being sexually harassed, either by a woman or indeed another man, how would you respond? How would you deal with his case?
You know, a victim is a victim. It's a woman, it's a man, it's a black, it's a white. A victim is a victim. And there is a lot of violence in our society. If you are homosexual, if you are a woman, if you are disabled, you could be victim of violence. So every violence is a problem. My subject is to understand why women are massively in each country victim of violence, and to find solution. You speak about how it is possible to make a law to change idea. We can't put a law in the parliament to say, okay, now you think that violence is a bad thing. It's not possible. But we can act. Public policy can change our mind. And in France, we see that. Since 20 years, we have massive, major public policy, for example, on road safety. And in 20 years, in France, we change our mind on road safety. We educate all the children in all the schools in France. We teach road safety to our children. We recruit public servants to apply the law. And our President of the Republic make a lot of TV to say, oh, road safety is a priority. And we make major campaign of communication. In France, we depend 12 million euro each year during 10 years to make a campaign of communication about this subject. So in 20 years, we change radically our way to think the road safety. I think that it's the same on violence against women. If we educate all the children, if we recruit public servants and form them, if all the medical public servants were formed to detect violence and to take care of women, we will end violence very quickly, perhaps in 10 or 20 years, but it's quickly.
All right.
And if tomorrow if every president in the world, Emmanuel Macron, for example, but all over the world, make a big summit to say, okay, now we end violence against women and we will put money on the table to do that, I think that our world could, in 20 or 30 years, end violence against women.
Thank you very much indeed, Catherine de Haas, Matthew Gutmann and Mona Eltahawy. Thank you all very much indeed. Really nice to end a programme with everyone agreeing. Now, thank you as ever for watching the programme. If you want to see it again, as I'm sure you will, you can go to the website, aljazeera.com. If you want more discussion, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And there's the Twitter sphere. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. I'm @Martine Dennis. From the whole team here in Doha, it's bye for now.